Hey also, and welcome back to the Welsh History Podcast Freeform edition. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And today I wanted to just take some time and talk about my process for doing this podcast. What is it like? What tools do I use? And kind of go over the research I'm doing and how a script would look like so you have an idea of what it is we do. And in video format, this is going to be helpful because I'm going to bring up stuff so you can see it. I'll try and explain it as best I can in audio format so that it makes sense and can be useful. So let's start out by just talking basically about the tools because I think that's the first thing I want to do. And I've gone through, I can't tell you how many microphones and various connection points and computers and cameras, try and come up with something that works. I used to stream full time, not full time. I used to stream like every couple of days during a week. I'd do like 3 streams a week, doing video games. I also did video recordings, and all of which using these tools, which I initially actually started to put together many years ago. So in 2015, when the group I used to work with called Distractions Media, we had worked on trying to do a bunch of videos and have a video series on YouTube that we were doing video gaming with. And we kicked off that process initially without cameras or any of that stuff. We were just using the footage of the video games themselves and had a kind of a loose script, I would argue, and did a series based on that loose script. And we did a few others. And we did that for about a year from 2015 in the spring to the summer of 2016, at which point is when I stopped doing it on a full-time regular basis. And by full-time, I mean I was putting out a video a day. I ended up then deciding that I pulled back from a bunch of stuff I'd been doing from podcasting and all sorts of different stuff and just focused in on this particular podcast. So that's how it kind of began. The idea being is that we would use these tools to help with the video editing process. And it was during that time when I got introduced to streaming because we were trying to do a fundraiser. And in the fundraiser, we were streaming it on Twitch. And because of that, we then had webcams and all the other stuff that we started to use as our tools. So initially, that was what I used. I used a webcam. The quality wasn't great. The audio was on a blue microphone, which was not very good. And if you ever, for some reason, went back and watched those, you would have a pretty good clue just how bad they were. The audio is very tinny, I would call it. So you sounded very much like you're using a cheaper microphone. And shortly thereafter, I ended up getting slightly better microphones, and it kind of went that way for a long time. And then a couple of years ago, I bought a Go XLR, which is a type of device where you can modify sound and edit the sound to try and make things better. It acts as basically a point where you stick the microphone into, and it does some work on the microphone quality, and then it ships it to the computer, and the computer then does more, and you can kind of make everything sound better, richer, more normal, the way you would sound if I was talking to you in person as opposed to talking to you over a phone call, so to speak. And in that respect, I think it does a reasonably good job. I think, except for occasionally when it decides to just not work, as I found out earlier this year, or my editing software decides it doesn't want to work, which has been a bit of a problem this last month. By the way, let me cover something as we're talking about that. So I did not know that when I was editing my videos, which I had been doing for about a month or so, that one of the formats I was using was actually recording the video format very badly. Well, actually, it wasn't recording it very badly. It was recording it perfectly, and then shipping it to my editing software was doing it badly, which had a setting that was wrong, but I hadn't picked up on it. So I was doing the editing, publishing the video would go up. And if I was using the Welsh History Podcast standard that I use for both the regular podcast and Freeform, it would actually create problems because it was actually editing it down in a quality which is way worse than what I'm used to. And then the Ancient Wales podcast episodes would come out as normal. So their quality is great. And for some reason, for about 4 episodes, both the Freeform and the regular podcast, the actual videos are not great. And it looks like you're watching something from like mid 2000s ish. And unfortunately, there's zero I can do about it. I unfortunately have, as the BBC would do with a lot of productions, I save over stuff to save space. And so I didn't conclude this would be a problem. And basically, what it comes down to was something on my own part where I made a mistake. I didn't double check after the fact that the videos looked fine. And I have been doing that since then. Everything's working much better now. But that caused the problem there. So if you see these videos and you're like, oh my goodness, that's the fundamental issue. And I apologize. Hopefully, it's working better now for everybody. And hopefully, we're all back to normal. I will be double checking this one just to make sure. So if I had to go back to and this is a problem I found with technology over the years, is that sometimes it'll do things and you won't know until after the fact. Like I had one of my video software, every time we were streaming, if Microsoft had an update the day before, because I would stream on a Wednesday and Microsoft likes to make changes on Tuesdays, sometimes it would completely wreck the quality of the video because the software used to actually stream the video wasn't working right, but it wouldn't display that to me when I was looking at it. It only display that to people watching on Twitch or YouTube or whatever, and they'd be like, your quality is really bad." And I'm like, "Uh-oh." So that is always fun. And that's kind of where things are when you're doing these kind of video and audio editing. It can be really tricky. I know early on it took me a long time to kind of find my way around some of the sound issues. And the Go XLR has been a godsend on that front. Thankfully, with it, I've been able to deal with a lot of problems I have, including the fact that I am constantly exhaling at the end of sentences and things, and it's very much picked up on the microphone. So I've done a lot of work to try and mitigate that as best I can. I've changed the microphone several times. Now I've actually got a very cheap microphone rather than the big expensive kind, because I was finding the big expensive kind were even worse for picking up noise. And so because of that, it created more problems than it was worth. So I've actually degraded my microphone a bit, but the microphone works just fine. And actually my audio quality is better, not worse, thanks to the fact that it's more direct. It cuts out a lot of my surrounding sound, and that's a big thing for me. So as a audio editing person who has done this for the past 10 years, I've really noticed how it changed a lot of the quality of the audio, and it forced me into doing less editing, which is something that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be better at making my life easier on that front, because it becomes so difficult when you're like having to spend 3 times the amount of time editing that you do when you're trying to publish something. I just noticed this hat I'm wearing is actually creating fun problems for the video. Hopefully it's not too bad. But the so that was part of the issue. And for me, that's been, like I said, something that's really helped me out, because now I don't have to kind of worry about that aspect of it. It's one less thing to annoy you and take time. And for me, that's important. The less time I can take editing, the better it is. I just have to be careful and make sure I double check things and not just assume that everything, even when settings haven't really changed, are perfect. So, that in mind, let's kind of move on. I kind of want to delve into a couple other things, and one of which is how the podcast is created. So we've talked about the other thing I've done is I've changed out my camera, and over the years I've had a bunch of different things. I had a DSLR that was hooked up at one point. I had just a regular webcam. Then I had a slightly better webcam, and then I flitted around with that. And currently I have a Sony. It's a Zez, I believe is how you say that word, ZR1 or ZR1, depending on where you're from. And it works really well. I actually think it's been one of the better quality. It's a very small, sleek camera by comparison to the bigger DSLR, so I don't need to take up as much space. And because of that, it allows me to have a much more webcam-like thing. Sometimes it doesn't work as perfectly as it should. Sometimes it loses focus just randomly, and that's frustrating. So I've hopefully dealt with all of these little bugaboos, which drive me crazy. I don't know if everybody else notices. If you're listening, obviously, you're not going to see any of this, so that may make no sense to you. But for me, it's a really big thing that I really get uptight about. I can't help me and how I look, but I can help how the video looks and try and make it as good a quality as possible. So, with that said and done, let's talk a little bit about scripting and about editing and about the writing of a Welsh History podcast script. And I talked about this a little bit in the past, but let's kind of look at this way. So, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see the script I've got up front, which you can see and I'll explain. So I have Google documents I keep that have all of the various scripts, and something I've learned over the years, you can actually max out a Google Doc. I did not know you could do that, but if you write enough stuff, the Google document will actually stop taking any more. So I've actually had to split them up into parts. Kind of where I came up with the idea of seasons, because I was like, okay, since I have to divide this anyway, I'm going to divide it through a method that makes sense. So in this case, I've divided it from 1 to, I think, 106 or 105, which is where 105. So episode 105 is basically our start of season 2. That's basically because of this problem. I could write more than 105. I think I got up to like 130 or something when I realized that I maxed out the amount. So every time I switch to a new season, I then create a whole new Google Doc to try and take it. Now, these scripts that I write are basically something I research out in advance, and I try and deal with as much as I can, getting everything as accurate as I can, if possible. I work to, and as I'm talking about this, I'm scrolling down in one of the scripts. So you can actually, if you wanted to, you could slow down and read it and see exactly what the script's about. This particular script that I'm showing you is the first one post-independence, so the end of the last Kingdom of Wales and the start of the season 2, which is Second Class Citizens, is the name of the episode 105. And so the research I did for that then gets written down, and sometimes I fix the grammar, sometimes I don't bother. Quite frequently, I try and write down trickier words in kind of a format that makes it easier for me to pronounce them, because I do have issues, as we all well know, with that. So I do try and deal with that as much as possible. And you can see, if you're watching, that sometimes my spelling is not ideal, but I do the best I can to make sure it's legible at least, and then go through the entire process and kind of what the idea is to have the script have a story. The story then tells us this is where point A starts, this is where point B ends, and this is how the script will work. What is the reason for the script, and how are we doing this, and how are we writing about it? And the thing that I kind of look at is what's the plot line basis that the script is being made from, which quite frequently is how I start these. I kind of come up with an idea. So like in this one, it's talking about kind of the initial aspect of what's driving the English settlement and English dominance in Wales, and kind of the Welsh reaction to it, focusing a bit more on various ideas within Wales, some of the politics, some of the strategies, and various different things that are coming about because of this. And that kind of dominates a lot of the script writing process for me. Is how do I tell something that makes sense? And if you look on the side, I don't think I can, I can't make it bigger, but you can see that, each script has a title. It then leads into the script itself. And the one thing that each of these scripts generally do, though not all, it depends on how much freelancing I want to put into the script. So if there's something I want to talk about in advance that may be a little bit more personal, or has a little bit more something I understand without having it explained to me all the time, I will go back. So in other words, if this is a script where I'm not familiar with what's going on, I won't do this as much. I'll stick straight to the script because I feel like if I don't, then things go badly and I don't cover things quite correctly and I get very crossed up on them. So I don't want to do that. And I want one of these things to kind of work out and be understandable. So for me, that's a big portion of it, is trying to avoid having scripts go off and go crazy and not work right. And so that's something I'm always trying to ensure doesn't happen when talking about these things. And so that is a big portion of this problem and how I'm looking at it and kind of picturing it in my cranium. So if I'm going to go talk a lot kind of above board, if I'm talking about a personal issue or strategy or, whatever, I don't want it to become a situation where there is, in effect, a conversation where I'm freelancing a lot of the topic when I don't necessarily understand it very well, where I don't necessarily know it very well. And then I end up saying something that's wrong or something that doesn't have a basis in reality. Or maybe I just confuse the story a little bit and then that creates problems. So typically when I'm going off on my own, it's because I either know the story really well and can just riff on it based on my own interpretations of things, or conversely, I have a story which relates in some way, which I can bring up and talk about it in and of itself, either through the politics of the day, the politics I know in my personal life and the reality of things, or comparing it to history and sources that I have studied in much more depth because of university or because of my own personal research. So that's when I usually riff a little bit more. So it gets a little bit more straight to camera and a little less kind of looking down. As you can tell, when I'm reading the script, sometimes my eyes will go like that. This might be telling you a little too much on the sausage bit, but for me, that's important to kind of understand and look at and evaluate things based on that. So again, typically, I've found that scripts end up running between 5 to 6 pages in length. That usually gets me at least 20 minutes worth of a script. And then if I add bits and pieces on, it can stretch things out. And sometimes I end up with scripts that are much longer and much more complex. And frequently, those are the ones where the episode goes over like the 40-minute mark or something along that line. So that's kind of where my strategy is with this. I try and keep it brief in scripts so they don't get too long, because if they get too long, then it can be too much for me to deal out. And I know it's difficult when you're reading to kind of make it as exciting as you possibly can. So I try and avoid that as much as possible, but realizing that I can get in trouble if I'm not sticking to the script, I do also try to stick to the script. So it sounds a little like I'm saying one thing and then doing another, but the reality of it, it's a bit of both, really. I mean, there are points where you want to have, like this, where I'm just having a discussion off the top of my head and not delving in from a straight script point of view. But at the same time, the script is there to keep me on topic, to keep me grounded in the actual history and not trying to waddle along into something which makes zero sense and actually accomplishes very little. Now, with all that said, there is then the tools that I have to use in order to make the podcast actually turn into something more than a podcast, to turn into more than a recording, and that's the editing procedure. And I use two different things to do that. One is DaVinci Resolve, which is the video editing software, which I start with. That ends up being the first port of call, I guess I would say, for the video editing, because it's easier for me to edit the video first and then turn it into an audio format, because you can just copy it across into Audacity, which is the tool I use. The key with Audacity is it's free, and I've used it since 2014. So I'm very used to how it looks and how it works. So it's a lot easier for me to stay consistent. I've noticed that if I flip to other tools, sometimes the other tools have so many things to adjust to that it takes a while to kind of get used to them. So that's where I kind of stay away from that as an option. And I kind of look at that as being a key point is I want to use something that I'm familiar with, that I know how to use, that I don't have to make massive adjustments to so that I'm not struggling to understand. And I'm sure you've noticed this week as this episode went out, I've done a short which I put up. I'm going to try and do a bit more of those. I don't know how many I'll do, but if there's something clippable in the episode, I think I might try and do more of that, because I think that is an important thing to add to this story. This is my video editing software. I've tried a different bunch. This has actually been pretty good. DaVinci Resolve, I actually quite like. It's used by professionals. It's not cheap, but it's cheaper than paying a monthly fee to Adobe or a yearly annual fee, where, yeah, it updates and you get better updates, but at the same time, it isn't yours, so to speak. So this is the software I end up using. You can kind of see how it works here. This is the actual video itself if you're watching. So to explain, it sets up timelines in which you can have the video and the audio, and then you can edit just by cutting or doing various things to sort of change the way the dynamics of it look. Or you can add in things like an overlay, which then goes on top of stuff. And it kind of creates an easy editable video if you've got experience. I will say that. If you're starting from scratch, it can be a little overwhelming, but then every video editing software is a bit overwhelming to start with. You have to kind of get your feet. The one thing I really like with DaVinci Resolve, which I found very handy, is there's a lot of YouTube videos of people who, struggling like we are actually going through and giving you the information to help you out, to try and define what's going on, to try and help understand it better, which I think is a great way to, if you're a visual person, not kind of understand how it works. But even for somebody like me who's not really a visual learner, it can be very helpful when you're trying to do it step by step to kind of follow the instructions that people are giving. And there's lots and lots and lots of that out there. In fact, there's times where I continually forget how to do something like take a green screen and make it invisible. Those kind of things, I have to go back every time and go look for the same video on how to do that. Or, when you're doing the video editing. And it's this particular software that pooched me over, because obviously something was done that created a problem, and I didn't catch it until, unfortunately, after the fact. And thankfully, I was able to edit the last video and get it looking better. But unfortunately, there are 3 or 4 videos that are just never going to be better than what they are quality-wise on the video. But you can still listen to them in audio, and they're just fine. And thankfully, that is the case. Now, the other thing is when I am tuning this and I make it into a video, that's then when I turn it into the audio format, because thankfully the audio format through Audacity actually will edit this into an audio clip, which then I can manipulate and add, like the ad spot, which you have to have. And it helps me to know where to break the ad in so it's not as jolting. And try to help with those kind of things. So, oh, that sound is here comes the ad and the key out. Oh, that's the end of the ad. So those are the kind of things which I can do with these tools. And it's not, I shouldn't say it's not massively complex, because it is. It's not that easy to just start from scratch and do on your own. But when you have a lot of time and effort and you've constantly having to sort of pick up the pieces and do it yourself, it does get very easy-ish. And so for me, having worked with Adobe, having worked with like things like Movie Maker, you kind of have a concept of how things work, and then it helps you to go from those to this and not be completely lost. And like I said, if you are lost, it's easy enough to look up a YouTube video on how to deal with it and how to do it, which I think really, really helps out and gives you the opportunity to present something in a way that hopefully is useful. Now, I wanted to just briefly discuss one more thing for this episode, and that's Roman Britain. Roman Britain will be coming out probably in September. I think I'm going to take a break from it. I might do an intro where it would normally be in the schedule for August. And then what I'm going to try and do with that is I'm going to try and input different little clips to sort of give better visuals with that and kind of convert into a bit more. Here's the map. Here's this. Here's what a soldier would look like, to try and make it more visually interesting. Because I recognize that having just a talking head isn't as visually interesting, but I don't want to make it so visual that an audio listener can't understand what I'm talking about. I've listened to audio podcasts, especially sports ones, where they might have a clip of the game or something and they'll input it in. And then they have to go back and explain what they put in because, of course, it's so much. If you're listening to it in the audio format, it doesn't work. And so I don't want to get to that point where it's so convoluted and creative that way that it becomes not usable for someone listening on an audio podcast. And my idea and reasoning for doing this is because, well, I've seen there are some people who've done a bit and pieces on Roman and Britain. Nobody's done a holistic, multi-episode podcast or really a video series even. Like we talk about Rome, or they're talking about Britain's history, or they're always talking about a wider thing. And Roman Britain's just a part of the wider thing. And I know why that is, because we have very little written documentation that you can go back to and say, well, blah, blah, evidence. You have a few bits and pieces of wars that were being carried out. But I think the key is there's lots of archaeology that you can still pull from, much like ancient Wales, where I was able to create 10 episodes based on Iron Age history. I think you can do the same with Roman Britain. You can definitely create a fairly long series. It's going to be a mini series in all likelihood, because I think it'd be very difficult. But the other thing I'm hoping to do in the coming months is, and especially once we get to the new year, is I'm hoping to do a bit more on-site locational filming to add in to help out with all of this, because I'll be in the UK and can actually do that more. That's the hope anyway. But we'll see. So I have to look for work first. That's kind of important in the UK and have the right setup so that can work out. But that is something I want to do long term. I want to do some documentary type video, which actually goes to the sites of, say, the Glyndwr's Battle of Caerleon and places like that. So you can kind of get to grip on, oh, this is what this looks like, especially if you've never been there, you don't know. Or you've been there and maybe you didn't really understand fully kind of what things are, and maybe, just maybe, have people who have way more experience than me help out with that and talk about it and be able to be the experts that I am not. But all that said and done, I think that's a good place to end this episode. I hope this was somewhat educational, and I hope on the audio podcast it was still understandable what we're talking about and kind of give you a better idea of kind of the conundrums of doing this podcast and how it can be made. And honestly, we're almost up to 10 years of doing this podcast. Next May will be the 10-year anniversary. And I definitely want to have a lot of cool things coming for that. So thank you all once again. You are fantastic for listening and being a part of this series. And I am so grateful that I get as much feedback as I do, and all the comments, questions, and sometimes criticism are very helpful. So thank you. And if you do have questions, comments, or criticisms, you can always reach me at the Welsh History Podcast at gmail.com. You can reach out to me on most social medias at Welsh History Pod. If you are interested in Facebook, it's facebook.com/Welsh History Podcast. And if you'd like to help the podcast out financially, you can do that through patreon.com/Welsh History. Thank you, everyone. I hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Welsh History Podcasts is a member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. To find more information on them, you can do so at evergreenpodcasts.com. Thanks for listening.